This is Ed Charlock, writer-producer on What's New Scooby-Doo, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah!
The gang's all here, they're on the case, and there's no ghost that they wouldn't face, 'cause they dig it, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, they dig it, Scooby-Doo.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
Gentlemen, welcome aboard. I'm Dee Dee Skies, pilot of the Falcon Fury. Follow me.
Hello one and all, and welcome to episode 36 of the podcast. I've got another great show for you guys with another great conversation. With the release of SCOOB on the 21st of July, I wanted to have some interviews that kind of tied in with that release and created some synergy. You're allowed to hate me for using the word synergy. So I've been in contact with a number of people who've worked on the production of that film, of SCOOB. And on today's episode, we're going to kickstart that series with my conversation with one of the editors of SCOOB, Ryan Folsey. Ryan was really fun to talk to, really interesting guy, and I thought he had a lot of really good insights into the production of that film. Part of the process, I said I wanted to tie in with the release of SCOOB, but SCOOB was in production for roughly 5 years, from kind of the initial stages to actual release. And this is kind of giving me an opportunity to sort of interrogate that process, to actually talk to people who've been on the production and kind of find out what was going on over the course of that 5 years, and how the film ballooned and contracted and changed. There's been so many variations, iterations of the script and the film. Everybody is seeing all the concept art and the production artwork that's being posted online on Twitter, and it's showing us stuff that obviously was not in the film, characters that were not in the film, characters like Grape Ape or Jabberjaw. And though I did have this conversation with Ryan prior to the actual release of the Blu-ray, the home video, of which I recently did a review. Actually, that review delayed this episode. I was going to actually put out this episode, and then I felt like that review should come out. So apologies if you were all like, what's up with this review? I want to hear Scooby people talking. Anyways, although Ryan and I had this conversation prior to the release, he does talk about some of the stuff that we do see in the deleted scenes of the Blu-ray for SCOOB. Initially, I kind of lamented the fact that, it's not like this kind of tease where he's telling us, this bonus stuff that we haven't seen yet. But I really like the fact that, some people probably haven't seen the deleted scenes yet, but also for those of us who have, and then to hear Ryan talk about it, it just kind of creates this connective tissue. So I thought that was kind of cool. Lastly, I am continuing the experiment of releasing full interviews. I'm not chopping up conversations into one part or two parts. There will be an exception coming up, and that I probably will split into 2 parts. And I won't tell you who that's with yet. But if it comes in at around an hour, I'm just going to release them like this. And I'm curious what you guys think about it. I don't want to talk about it too much right now. I'll touch on it again in the outro. So for right now, just sit back, relax, wherever you are, and enjoy my conversation with editor of SCOOB, Ryan Folsey. We'll see you on the other side. So my guest today is an editor for film and television. He's worked in both live action and animation, and most recently has been part of the team that brought to fruition a little film called SCOOB. Very happy to welcome to the show Ryan Folsey.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
Thanks for being here, especially since the DVD is dropping not too long from now, so this will probably be timing out nicely with that. Have a little bit of a little synergy.
A little overlap. I like it.
So the first question I usually ask all my guests is, what was your first kind of exposure to Scooby-Doo? Were you a Saturday morning watcher? Did you come to it late? Is it something you've only kind of touched on professionally?
You know, it's funny, with Scooby-Doo, I was a fan, but as a kid, I was a big Jabberjaw fan. So I watched Jabberjaw, I watched, Wacky Racers, all that stuff. I did watch a bit of Scooby-Doo, but there was a lot of that, like, crossover that I was into. But the original script, actually, for Scoob had Jabberjaw in it. And I was like, oh. And I was, like, telling my mom, it was, like, hilarious, like, flashback to when I was a little kid. But, yeah, I mean, I liked it. I was probably, when I was really little, I was probably scared of it because it did have kind of a scary element to it. I look back and it's, like, hilarious. But, yeah, I mean, I watched. I was a big, Saturday morning kid. I had, like, a little trumpet I'd blow in my sister's ear. Time for cartoons. Let's roll. It was like 6 a.m. She probably wanted to wrap that thing around my neck.
Oh, like an actual literal trumpet.
Yeah, literal little trumpet. Yeah, so I was definitely a big fan. I'd seen some of the live action ones that they had done, but it wasn't something that animation wasn't even an area that I was super involved in. I was definitely more into live action and stuff, and then started getting into more hybrids and stuff like that, and did a Chipmunks movie. And once I started doing that, I just went over and interviewed with them, met Tony and Allison, and we just hit it off. And next thing you knew, I was cutting a Scooby-Doo movie. So I'm sure there are people that are way more versed in the Scooby-Doo world than me that could have cut it. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it's a really fun world. I love the kids. I love all the different characters. We were trying to kind of slam in a bunch of the the IP from the Hanna-Barbera world, because there's so much of it. I mean, you could go anywhere. You could slide into so many different Easter eggs all over that movie. So it was kind of fun to work with Tony, who's such a huge fan and knows it so well. So I learned a lot in the process, and it was fun to kind of tap back into my childhood a bit.
It's kind of interesting to hear you mention Jabberjaw, because not only is Jabberjaw a character that, other than in some select like Hanna-Barbera circles, you don't really hear about very often, but you're the second person I've interviewed from the film and the second person who've cited Jabberjaw as your favorite character.
That's hilarious.
I recently talked to Bryn Matheny, one of the character designers.
Oh, right.
Creature designer, yeah. She was a huge Jabberjaw fan, and she did like all the Jabberjaw development.
Oh, nice.
Before he got cut.
Yeah. It's funny because they actually also, Jabberjaw went from a male to a female character.
Oh, really?
It was a female character, and they were looking at who they could use for that, because she also had like a big singing voice in it, and so that we had some big musical numbers that we cut together, and it was like it was a lot of fun. It was definitely, we were sliding more towards like Lizzo or that, like making some pretty fun underwater dance numbers. It was pretty out there. But I think they just had too many characters, and I think it's tough when you already have the Mystery Gang, plus Scooby and Shaggy, plus Dick Dastardly and Muttley, and now you're bringing in Blue Falcon and Dynamite. It's like, I mean, we had Grape Ape, we had Jabberjaw, Captain Caveman's in it still. So it was tough. I think at some point we just had to kind of just, weed it out a little bit, and hopefully in future adaptations or other offshoots, they'll make some other movies with all that stuff, because they're such fun characters.
That's always the challenge when they set out, they announced that they wanted to create a Hanna-Barbera kind of cinematic universe, and Scoob was going to launch it. I think something a lot of people were wondering is, like, how are you going to balance all of those characters, which is what you were just addressing.
Yeah, no, it's a tricky one, and it's one that followed us all the way through the show. I mean, I came on in 2016, and then we worked on a version of the script there, and then I jumped off. They were kind of redoing some stuff, and I jumped onto Lego Ninjago with Chris McKay and all those guys, and worked on that for a bit, and then helped out on Smallfoot. Then came back to Scoob, and there was a whole new script there. So it's always been a tricky one to crack, because do you want to go full origin story? Do you want to go Bill and Ted's with Scooby and Shaggy having to find their friends and really go that way? Do you want to, because it's tough to start with an Avengers movie. You got to build to get to an Avengers. And in terms of all those characters, to slide them in to make it work properly. So it was kind of an in-between kind of state that we kind of ended up at, which we still were able to do an origin story, pull that in a little bit, and then have some fun with some other characters that are from the universe, and have a good time with it. So it was kind of an all-in-one, and it was interesting to see how the process kind of went.
So if you came in at 2016, was there roughly like 9 months to a year of development prior to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah, and they had another kind of version of the entire script was completely different. And then we did a change there, and then just kept adjusting and tweaking. We stayed in Act 1 for a while just to figure out how are we going to do this, because the kids, when they're little, it's such a, you really want to see that stuff. I think when I first came in, there was a board artist named Shaheen that did some boards it was really interesting. It was like the first time that Scooby and Shaggy had ever met in these rough sketched boards, but his boards are so beautiful. And it was like a little puppy Scooby and a little tiny kid Shaggy, and they were meeting for the very first time. And I remember just watching this sequence, and I was like, I have never seen this before, like in this state. You know what I mean? It was very raw. It was very pure. The music was very minimalistic, and like the way they kind of threw it together, and we added some stuff to it and kept building off of it. And it was interesting. It was really kind of fun. I was like, whoa, we got to somehow keep that in the movie. That is a great moment. However we do it, wherever we do it, to see the first time when these two iconic characters like meet is kind of cool. So that was fun to kind of build off of that, and then try to get, hey, how about we have the Mystery Gang kids and we meet them and then get them together, and then from there we can push on to, they start solving their first mystery, and then like building off of that was kind of fun to see the process happen, So
just kind of back to the development. I'm curious because I know the role of an editor in animation is pretty significantly different from the role of an editor in live action. You start much earlier in the process, and you're almost there developing the story with the writer and the director, are you not?
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm curious, when you came in, were you the first editor to come in, or was there another editor prior to you? Or
I was not. I believe, Bob, can't think of his last name, I'm so sorry. He was the first editor on, and then they kind of went down for a bit, and then they brought me in. And then from there, so we kind of had boards to work with. So they said, hey, take these boards and let's start building from this stuff. And that's kind of how we kind of used the script that was there to make it as good as possible. And then it started to change, and then we started kind of grafting in new ideas and stuff like that. So it was a process that was built off of an older version, as well as assets. Because once you start, you're in there going, I think they were working with real effects, and then they started building assets, and now you can get married into these assets that have been built, because that's money. And you want to...
So they actually moved beyond just like developing the script and the story. They were actually creating assets.
Yeah, I think they were starting to create, in terms of like, I think modeling and starting to kind of get some characters built, and certain ones are going to be in the movie, obviously, and you could see how the development of like, what kind of Shaggy do we want to do, what kind of Scooby do we want to do, and I think Tony was really like, we're sticking to the original, and let's make this exactly how I think it should be, which was really sticking to that model. So yeah, I think that was kind of an interesting way to see how it all kind of developed.
Yeah, I know they were pushing it into a more kind of real world place for a little while, just to kind of see what that would look like. And I know I've read interviews with Tony where he's talked about just how difficult it was keeping Scooby on model. So I'd be curious to find out what that was like to build that particular model. But
right. It's funny because he turns in certain directions, and you're like, whoa, that's not Scooby. So I think Tony is he is so like detail oriented in terms of the characters and what they can do and can't do, and like. Yeah, I learned a lot from him. I don't come from animation, so that really wasn't my world. But I learned a ton watching him. I learned a ton from Chris McKay. He was also great. With all the stuff he did with Lego Batman and the Lego movies and all that stuff. It was kind of fun. Like in those 4 years that I was at WAG, like I started off in the boards and learning how the board process worked, which I had done in live action, but not at that extent. And then jumping from that stage straight in, almost getting to layout, and then jumping into layout and animation in Lego Ninjago, and learning that world in a heartbeat so fast because the schedule was insane, and then jumping back to Smallfoot to help those guys out while we waited for Scoob to get ramped up. So by the time I came back onto Scoob, I kind of felt like I had gone to animations college, for a year and a half or something. So it probably helped me out. I learned a ton, and it was a lot of great people over there. So it was a good time. Yeah,
I was gonna point out at some point that my first encounter with your work was Eli Roth's Cabin Fever way back almost 20 years ago now. And now I'm watching your work on Scoob, and I'm thinking, that sounds like a very interesting and not entirely logical story progression.
Exactly.
As far as As far as career.
Yeah. I've worked on some interesting ones.
And like you said, you didn't start working in animation. How did you get into animation? Was Alvin and the Chipmunks your first project?
I did a TV show with Walt Becker. Like, I worked with Walt on like Wild Hogs and Old Dogs and a bunch of stuff over at Disney. And then he was working on a TV show called Kirby Buckets over at the Disney Channel. And he's like, hey, do you want to jump on this for, a couple months? And I'm like, sure. So I jumped onto that. It had rudimentary like animation built into this little kid's world of how he saw things. And it was more like 2D flat, moving around some stuff. And it wasn't very advanced, but it was fun. And then he called me and said, hey, I have a Chipmunks movie that I'd like to do, and I want you to jump on it. And I was like, okay. So when I first got on, I feel like Fox was probably like, whoa, this guy does not have any like animation experience. But man, the team that I had, my assists, everybody that was involved in that group was rock stars. Like, I was surrounded by geniuses on that show. So we, with an insane schedule, we worked really hard on that show, and we did, I thought we did a really good job. We released early. We were 2 weeks early, and they're like, great job, guys. We're going to open you guys up against Star Wars. We're like, great, thanks. So that got crushed, but whatever. But I learned a ton on that about the, three-dimensional blocking and like just how the scene is kind of blocked out in terms of having a character that's in a 3D environment and working with a live action person, and how to do the plates and how far you could push the focus planes and stuff like that. It was just another learning process, and I just was lucky to work with some really talented people. And so that was kind of my first taste of, once I saw the Chipmunks coming in and seeing that 3D live kind of chipmunk, was like, whoa, this is insane. And just where you could place them in the room, and I think those are actually probably tougher than animation, because you're dealing with real world live footage and characters. You got limitations, and you got to really work within them, or you'll get in trouble. You try to set up a plate with, like we had this one shot of this giant tree that all the chipmunks were around, and knowing they could only go past this route, because we're working with Weta, and Weta's like, sorry, but beyond that route, you're stepping out of focus, and now Alvin is out. We have to keep him here. This person's got to be there. There was just so many little variables you really had to keep in mind. And is that a 2-shot, or is that now a full shot of all 3 of them? Because that costs this much money. I mean, you start getting into the politics and the budgets of that stuff, and it gets tricky. Those are difficult dances to do, but I really learned a lot from it. And so by the time I landed with SCOOB, I felt at least well versed in the area of animation, although I'd never really done a fully animated movie. But working with those board artists was like a dream. They're such great artists. They're all so talented, and the collaboration in animation is just rad. I love all the people that I've worked with, so it was definitely a lot of fun.
It just occurred to me that you've done live action, you've done live action blended with animation, and you've done full feature-length animation.
Yeah.
You've kind of run the gamut.
I'm not a pro at any of them, but I feel pretty good. So definitely it was a lot of fun, and I do love live action. I do feel sometimes you're a bit, not handcuffed, but like the dailies come in, and those are the dailies you got to work with. Like, wow, this is not working well together. I got to just somehow make the best of these pieces of dailies sometimes. And with animation, you're like, whoa, that doesn't work. And then, hey, what if we did this? And like, boom, you just open it up. And the way that you can use flicks with the Avid, where I can like actually step into the Photoshop sessions that the PSDs and stuff that the board artists are working on, and their Cintiqs, to be able to just double click on it and be into that session and now change layers and move things around. Just, quickly to say, no, it should look like this. We want them moving left to right, and we don't want, Jabberjaw's not in the movie anymore. Take that layer out. Take this out. And we can move so quick to tell that story really quickly to get it back over to previs or whatever it is we're doing in boards and stuff. It's pretty awesome. That part I really like. And I went to school like for art and sculpture and painting, but like I felt like I just left that behind. But now that I'm back into this, it's so much more collaborative and creative and artistic, and so I really love that process. I've learned a lot from the board artists and everybody. So
So how much flexibility do you actually have once scenes start coming back?
Like from previs and stuff, like once we...
Yeah, like I know in live action, like you said, what you have is what you have unless you're on some big studio movie where you've got scheduled reshoots or additional photography where you can go, okay, we need to tweak this, we have a scene we're missing or whatever. But in animation, like once it starts being created, once the scenes start coming in, I know on television shows there's a certain number of retakes they have on each episode that they can send back to a studio. But particularly with like a large CGI feature film, how far can you go with the editing process before it's like, we're done, we can't do any more to this, we're locked in?
Yeah, I think you try to do as much kind of working with it in, layout and stuff. Once the animation comes in, the handles are pretty small on those shots, even though you're begging for like 8 to 16 frame handles, so you can like open up shots and stuff. Once, you're also dealing with, actually bringing in the live actors to do the dialogue, and sometimes dialogue changes and, it opens things up, or you want to do a joke and try something here, so you can get a little bit jammed in areas. But I feel like there's way more wiggle room leading up to final animation than you have in live action, in my opinion. I mean, sure, we push the limits in areas, and especially when you're dealing with lip sync, you can get into trouble pretty fast. I think we were lucky on Ninjago because all the ninjas have their faces covered, so we would just have their their faces shake, or like Master, like his like little like beard would shake, and we could fake lines and do jokes all the way up almost to the final mix. But with Scooby-Doo, that lip sync was so crucial and tricky to nail down that you can get jammed into some of that stuff. So I'd probably say there's room to do some stuff, but you better really get busy in boards and do as much work as you can once you hit previs and the layout process to really open up some cuts. You almost want to like pad things out a little bit in case some more jokes come in, or you want to end on a reaction shot, and you want to so I always kind of cut a little bit fat in the beginning just so I have room to trim back if I need to, as opposed to trying to buy back frames once it's too late, So
do you schedule certain sequences knowing that, okay, well, this is something big and we might want to change it, so when it comes in, they've got time to change it?
I think so. I think even like, when you first get it going, which sequences are going to go into previs first, it's like you kind of try to get the ones that feel like, obviously you want the locations and the assets, whichever ones are built first and that they're ready with to move forward on. But it's the big ones that usually kind of save to the end. I think some of the stuff in the end of Act 3 in SCOOB was just so large, all the stuff in Greece and stuff, and all the battle sequences and stuff, and dealing with Cerberus, that was all saved to the end, basically because we were also trying to get the writing correct and really make all that kind of come together and tie up in a bow. So for me, in every movie, this opening and the ending are always like, let's deal with those last, let's get this middle together. You just know it's going to change, and things are going to get tweaked on an opening and tweaked at an ending. So for me, like, I feel like that's probably the areas that I always try to kind of like push off to the end if possible, So
I guess on a show like SCOOB, which took like 5 years to get to the screen, I mean, you're probably pretty sure what you're going into once once you actually start sending those things away to get animated.
Yeah, definitely. Now,
again, building off of that, the movie took 5 years to come to the screen. You came on, you were the second editor. I know that there was a pivot somewhere like halfway through where they brought Dax Shepard in, and there were some story changes that were going on. How many iterations of the film, or the story rather, were you a part of, or did you see?
I'd probably say I was involved in like 4 to 5 pretty serious, like, throw it out the wall, this is where it sits, what do you guys think? I'm like, really, like, we put all 3 acts up there, watched it. I think the one before Dax showed up, we had one there, we had one with Dax, we had one right after Dax, then we had probably 1.5 more after that, where we really had some real big structural changes that we tried to do. And it's tough because you're trying to put together the best movie you possibly can for a fan base that is, they really care about this IP and they love it, and you want to do it justice. And I think Tony is the first guy to defend that to the death, because he he is a fan, you know what I mean? And he wants to make sure, because he's like, I'll rip this thing apart if it isn't right. And so I think he was trying to really do it service and really do it justice as much as possible. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, for sure with something like that.
You were talking about how they really cared about the IP, and I was just kind of thinking, like, a lot of movies are really fighting against their release date. And there are choices that can't be made because they're just like, we don't have time for this. But this movie had a really long gestation period, and they, for whatever the reasons are, they were making choices that really prolonged the production of this. And then, of course, they're faced with COVID when they try to release it. But it is interesting that you guys kind of had the space to make those changes, those decisions, those pivots. Mm-hmm. Is that a sense that you got kind of in the room?
Yeah, I think they were always kind of just... I think it's tough. I think whenever you're trying to crack open a universe to something, you have to be very delicate with it. And I feel like Scooby-Doo is really like the main like portal into this larger Hanna-Barbera world. And they just wanted to make sure that they were doing it right and it was well received, because anytime you're restarting, something like that, like, hey, here's a new Scooby-Doo movie, and you're also trying to lace in some other pieces of, the Hanna-Barbera world, you got to be really careful with that. And I think that's probably why they were as delicate as they were with getting it how they felt it was the right way to release it. You know what I mean? I think that's okay. And you're bringing in writers and other writers on top of it, and you're trying to like kind of see through all of that and what is the reason we're making this movie. So I think it's a tough one. I think they were trying to be as careful as they possibly could with it to make sure they did the right thing. It's a tough one. People love Scooby-Doo and don't mess with it or they're going to kill you. So it's tough. And I think some areas, people aren't happy with this or they're not happy with that, or they felt that we went the wrong direction here, or we should have stayed origin, or there's so many different ways you could have played it. I don't know if you're ever really going to make everybody satisfied with something like that you're tapping into someone's childhood, and it's like you don't want to step on that. Like I've seen movies that I saw when I was a kid and they've been remakes, and now I'm like so mad, and it's like they didn't mean to make me mad. They're just trying to make a movie. You know what I mean? So I think that's a tough one, because you're really, like my generation is like, we grew up on that. And then there's other subsequent generations that have grown up on this classic, cartoon character in Friends. And so everybody interprets that differently, and I think it's a delicate one. People can get really upset if it's not done right. And I mean, so far I think everybody was really happy. We laced in a lot of Easter eggs. Guys like Mike Korinsky, the production designer, is awesome. Like we had some really, really talented people that cared about it, that really tried to bring things. So we'd have meetings like, what if we did this? And like, yeah, and what if we lace this in? We'll put the name signage. Like those guys went over and over every set to see where they could drop some Easter eggs in places, and
there's an insane amount of Easter eggs.
It's pretty insane. I was like, oh my god, you guys are crazy, But it was rad. I mean, it's like I like it because if you really watch stuff and look at signage and look at placement of different things, it just shows they cared. Like they took time to care. Like they did their research. Tony knows that world so well. Korinsky climbed all over that world, and I was just happy to kind of like help push it along and keep it all in order, with all the other members of the team and stuff. So it's tough, but I feel proud of how hard everybody worked to try to get it out there, especially considering what we had to deal with at the end.
It is kind of tempting fate with these properties like Star Trek, Star Wars, Scooby-Doo, they've been around for 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
Generational, like it's not just one group, right? Like there's the group like us that grew up with it.
Totally.
There's the other group who maybe they were pup named Scooby-Doo kids, or maybe they were, Mystery Incorporated kids or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, you're not going to make everybody happy.
Totally.
It's a fool's errand.
That's true. Definitely. And you're also trying to make a movie that kind of can hit all different generations as well, because like I would bring my 8-year-old nephew in to watch stuff, and I'm like, what did you think of that? And I'm like, is that too scary for you? Like the haunted house, we had some pretty scary music in, and it was borderline a little too scary. And it's funny to see somebody like that at that age to be like, no, that was fine. Like, these kids have watched like pretty crazy stuff. And so it kind of makes you kind of rethink, but you also want to be careful of the kids that maybe haven't seen that kind of stuff. And so you got to, watch out for that, and parents. And, it's a tough one. It's definitely a balance for sure.
Now, something I noticed the first time I watched this movie, it does feel really trim. There isn't a lot of fat on it. And I was curious, how long were like your early story reels?
Trying to think. We definitely, I think when we were in boards, it was a much longer film, and I think that we really allowed it to kind of grow and just to see how it was feeling. So when we turned stuff over to previs, we almost did a lot of work, in my opinion, in the layout stage to really like not only, check cameras and where we're doing in terms of scouting locations and stuff, but also to just kind of, okay, where do we want to sit on this? Do we want to open this up more? We really kind of looked at like, where are the places that, this movie can breathe for a second. And I think as we came down to the end, I know we did like kind of a trim pass at the end, and it was kind of a doubling up. And I kind of feel like, in my opinion, in some areas, I just thought we got a little bit tight on some of the cuts. It's tough because you just don't have that much time to really open those back up. Once you've made those trims at the end, you got to live with them. And, there are discussions about that. And I think some people wanted things tighter. Some people wanted it I like things to breathe a little bit more, but you win some, you lose some, and hopefully you don't mess up the pacing too much. We never had a screening where people were like, oh, it's way too long. Like, it was always like, pacing feels good, might be a little tight in this area, might be a little tight in that area. I kind of grew up in a house. My dad was a film editor for years. And he's cut, crazy comedy stuff. Watching him do, as a kid, I only got to see from like probably Blues Brothers on, but like Animal House, but all his stuff with Landis, from Kentucky Fried Movie through Trading Places, Coming to America, all that stuff. His comedy timing was always something that I tried to emulate and live up to, and there was always a reason for the cut, and I always believed in that, and he pounded it in my head whether I knew it or not by growing up in his cutting rooms as a kid. And so I always try to think like how my dad would do something in a situation. And, sometimes you got to speak up and say stuff, and sometimes maybe your feelings about a cut are wrong. And, it's like it's a subjective format, and some people think, oh, that feels great. Other people are like, oh, it's too long. And, editing it's a tricky one. I think that there was areas that we could have probably opened it up a little bit more and let it breathe a bit. But, it's a rocket, that's for sure.
Yeah, if there's one criticism I have of the film, I could easily have had another 10 or 15 minutes in there just to let some character stuff kind of like breathe, like you say.
Yeah.
Was there not pressure, but was there a desire from Warner Brothers to keep it tight to like 90 minutes?
They never threw a number at us. It's always tough when you're dealing with animation because there is a budget that you're trying to work within, and each shot you make is costing you money. It's like it's not something that you shot out at a set or at a location where the money's spent there and now let's put it together. You have it. You're actually having to create that space out there that you're trying to build that world. So I know that, money always is a factor in animation, but I know that they're really pushing for good storytelling as well. I don't think there was never really a number they gave us. I think they just, showing it to an audience, they just checked pacing with how audiences felt and how we all felt about it. And, I think everybody was pretty much on the same page. There's always going to be one or two of us that are like saying, hey, what about this? But as an overall, I think everybody on the stage was feeling pretty good. It's tough because, once you marry in music and stuff, and you kind of want some of the cues will hit at a certain point, and when you get that final music, I think Junkie did a great job. But sometimes when music hits, it'll tighten that cut up for you. Where maybe that music used to hit a little bit earlier in the temp score. So sometimes when that happens, like in live action, you can maybe like open it up a little bit more, like let's do this. But once you've got those frames that are like fully rendered out on the stage, you're tied to it. You got to deal with it. So I think we had to do a little bit of restructuring and having some stings kind of like tighten up at the back end and stuff. And But all in all, I think everybody just worked their butt off to make it as good as we could, considering.
You kind of jogged something in my memory where I remember reading an article where they were talking about there's this idea that if you can imagine it, you can bring it to the screen in animation, right? Like it's effects that weren't possible in live action. You could make an animated film. But then when they switched to digital and the CG, that changed. That it became more like live action again because you were literally building sets. You were just building sets virtually, and you still had to pay people to build those. And like it was just a different, more intensive is not the word that I want to use. I'm not sure what the word I want to use is, but the process is just a lot more difficult, I guess. That has nothing to do with editing. So there was another editor credited for the film. That was
Vonera Tang. Yeah.
Was that somebody that came after you, or was that somebody that you were working with?
She was someone that originally I was working with a guy named Dave Mandel when I first came on, and then Dave jumped over into development, and then I jumped off to do Lego Ninjago. And I think Honor and I met the same day on Lego Ninjago to come in to help out. She had worked with Chris McKay on Lego Batman, so they brought her in to Ninjago to help out just with the cut and to move that because that movie was moving pretty fast. And so we met, we became great friends. She has just an insane work ethic and is just a great editor. And we just hit it off. So when I went down to Sydney on Ninjago, she remained up in LA. And then when I came back, I jumped over onto Smallfoot. And they kept her, I think, to just keep her around at WAG working on stuff. And then she was going to go on to another show. And I said, hey, Dave is working in development. If you want to jump onto the show with me, I'd love to have you. I'll share it with you because, you're a great editor. So she jumped on with me, and we cut it together. So she's great, fantastic editor. She understands the animation world so well. So it was great to have somebody like that, team up with me,
In the action sequences, there's a lot of like handheld kind of look and camera work. And I know in live action, when you're going handheld, it affects your decisions as far as like your shot selections and your editing and stuff because it's how many cameras you have, it's how many angles you're going to have. That's what you're working with. In animation, when you're going to those sort of handheld sequences, does that change your approach editorially at all, or is it just you've got your 3D space and you've got your 3D camera and they're just moving it around?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely a decision that Tony wanted to make. I think he really felt like, look, we're going to shoot this like as if we were going to shoot live action. Because we're like, oh, what if we put a camera here and it flew by here and did this and that? And he's like, no, I want it to be in a place where that is where a camera would be. This is what would happen. And so he really kind of wanted to ground the film and make it feel that way. When we did some of the handheld stuff, I think he just wanted it to feel kind of, raw and really like as if you were in, like the roller coaster stuff is just like pretty crazy. And some of the camera moves, I know they did a lot of like, not like The Office, like with move-ins on people, but that camera was definitely moving a bit. I think they definitely made a choice that they were going to do this. The first pass through, I think, was a little bit too much, so they backed off of it. But that was definitely a design that they wanted to do for sure, and they were like, we're going to stick with this, and this is what we're going to do. But the camera was definitely a big deal in terms of where we're putting it and how we're going to do this. They definitely had a plan for that. So as far as editing goes, it does affect us, but it wasn't something that I felt problematic at all. I think a lot of that stuff is added at the end with the cameras. We're just kind of, once we go from storyboards into pre-vids and they start setting cameras, once we get into animation, I think it was really more like that was between Michael and with Tony just to decide where they wanted to, put those cameras and move them and make them feel a little bit more like handheld and or not so much locked off, but like part of the scene as opposed to like these fake cameras that you see sometimes like, how could you ever put a camera there? Like, I think they wanted to really feel believable, in as much as possible in an animated film.
Were there any sequences that either you had cut personally or that you knew got cut from previous iterations that you were really sorry to see go? I mean, obviously Jabberjaw, I suppose.
Yeah, Jabberjaw was fine. It was just because it was a big, ridiculous underwater dance number. It was ridiculous. But there was a couple. There was the original way that Shaggy and Scooby got on the Falcon jet was they were serious fanboys of Blue Falcon, and they still are in the movie. But in this case, they knew every single like inch of that ship. So when Dee Dee Skies first is like, and over here is, like, Shaggy just like cut her off and like ran over to it and said, this is this. And then he just went on this tirade around the ship. And it was just really funny and just super energetic. I missed that one. I just thought it was great. I think they still had some really funny stuff. I mean, the Ikea joke and that stuff is really funny. It was kind of from that point on. It got pretty crazy, and we had a couple Easter eggs in there where they open up like a sauna, and there's like Quick Draw McGraw like in the sauna, like covering up with like a towel. You know, so we were starting to lace in some of the IP and like some Easter eggs, which was funny. And we did back off of that a little bit, but I missed that sequence. I thought it was pretty funny. One of the funnier ones, you know. And Blue Falcon changed over a period of time. You know, he was definitely a little bit more boisterous and arrogant and stuff, and so it's tough because you see characters like they change, and then there's other areas that become better because of the character development. You know what I mean? So it's always a give and take with that stuff as characters develop and sequences change. You know, hopefully all leading to the right place. You know, but that was one I always kind of liked that version. It was just crazy.
I've always been interested since I saw it the first time. It kind of naturally starts with Scooby and Shaggy meeting, and that all makes sense. But as the film progresses and you get into the Dick Dastardly kind of section of the film, you're there's this whole other movie going on that you're not really a part of, and it's just sort of catching up with the movie that you're currently watching. And I wondered if there was ever any temptation or if there was ever an actual plan to have a Dick Dastardly kind of prologue to the film where you get to see him go and steal one of those like first skulls and then transition into the Scooby Shaggy origin, or if that was not something that anybody was thinking.
It was definitely something that we had. There was a movable piece in there that we used, and at one point it definitely was a cold open where you're like, whoa, you didn't know who this person was, and you saw what he was doing. Yeah, it was an interesting way to start it. I actually really liked it. And then we kind of moved it into the middle, or not the middle, but before you first met Dastardly. It was just tough because of if he's taking the skulls and then you're meeting Scooby and Shaggy and they're little, and then the gang is little, and then you go like a progression of like maybe 7 to 10 years by the time you meet them in the diner. What has he been doing this whole time? And it was just like there was a time issue in there that we were dealing with because we also wanted to do an origin. But if you started him stealing that first skull, you're like, man, what's this guy been doing for 10 years? He's only got one skull. So it was definitely kind of tough. But yeah, it was for sure drawn. It was prevised. I mean, that thing was ready to roll. It was just where was it going to go? And then in the end, we kind of stripped it out and then placed it into what Velma was looking at on the computer. So it's tough. You're trying to pack so much into a movie like that. It ended up getting stripped away a bit. But it was fun. It was like Machu Picchu, and it was these scientists going into this place, and they find this skull and how it got there, and then he comes in and extracts it out. And it was a lot of fun to put together. It's too bad it wasn't able to make it into the movie. We were only able to use a little piece of it, but it was definitely a fun process to put together for sure. But so to answer your question, yes.
Well, knowing that exists, I'm going to let that live on in my head canon.
I'll send you the boards.
Oh, nice. Yes, I'm all for this. Now, seeing some of the concept art that amazing artists that worked on this movie have been releasing on like Instagram and Twitter, there's a lot of images featuring a lot of the Hanna-Barbera characters. We know that there were originally more characters and then it got trimmed back. But I know like the Wacky Racers were in some of the images. Adamant, I know, was under development at some point. How big did this movie actually get? Like at its absolute biggest, how crazy was it? It
was pretty crazy. We definitely did. We had Penelope Pitstop. We had, Adamant. There was a really crazy sequence with Adamant coming out, and he was a lot of fun, but it was just one of those characters. Grape Ape was there. I mean, there's a whole story between Shaggy and Grape Ape, and Grape Ape is just when he's a little chimp size before he eats a grape, and then he blows up and gets gigantic. But there was that whole side story running through it. There was, definitely before Dee Dee Skies, there was a Penelope Pitstop character, and they did kind of a Wacky Racers kind of sequence with her driving. I think she was driving the mystery van, or she was in the race. I can't remember. and they're being chased through like Topanga Canyon or something, and it was an insane sequence that I think Shaheen also boarded. We had a couple guys that were incredible, like, you know, Nasus, and I mean, just these guys that have been there forever. And Raphael Zentiel, who was the head of story, did a fantastic job. Noel Raff, there's just a whole bunch of people. And John Duesenberry, I'm just trying to think of all of them. There's so many. But yeah.
Many.
And I'm sure they're all releasing their stuff because I've seen some of their stuff out there, and I'm like, oh, I remember that. It's just like crazy. But yeah, it was pretty big, and you know, I think when some of those characters were in, then other ones kind of weren't. But when they were all in, it was quite a feast of you know, Hanna-Barbera characters. Definitely, probably too much. It was a lot to bite off. I thought, you know, it was like we got to thin the herd here somewhere because you really lose sight of Scooby and Shaggy and all of that, you know, and it's like people came to watch a Scooby-Doo movie, you know. As much as those are really fun characters, it's one of those things where first you got to establish these guys and then build the world off of them, and then hopefully there's an appetite for those other characters in the future for them, you know.
I know I've heard some criticisms where people have argued that there's too much going on in the movie as it is, and I just think to like what I knew and now what I now know of how it could have been and how scaled back it actually is.
Yeah, no, definitely. We definitely took it into consideration. I mean, it's a tough one because you could honestly have done just an origin story, you know, and just met Scooby and Shaggy, met the Mystery Gang, you know, and really got to know them as little kids and finished it up at they get the mystery van. Next movie, you know, I mean, you could do that too. There's so many ways you could do it. So I think, you know, we were trying to really like placate a lot of different people and a lot of different ideas to kind of make it work. And I'm happy with what we came up with. You know, things could always be different. Things could be better. That's editing. You know what I mean? At some point, you gotta hit print and ship it, and that's the movie you got. Or you could work on it for another 5 years. So I'm actually glad we got something out there. But yeah, no, it's tricky.
I've heard that at some stage of development, Warner Brothers, at least, I'm not sure at kind of what level it was at, was considering minimizing the roles of the gang, and there was kind of some push and pull as to, well, we don't really know what to do with them, and rather than figure out what to do with them, like, can we just cut them out? I was wondering if you were around for any of that, if you had any insight into that kind of tug of war.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't so much that they wanted to, like, get rid of them. It was just like, what will be their purpose in this story? And are we just showing them to show them? And then all of a sudden we have a long stretch without them, and then they show up at the end, and it's like, is that what we really want to do with these great characters? And then we really started, you know, it was really the idea of like separating them was a big part of it. It was like, if we get Scooby and Shaggy over here and the Mystery Gang over here, it's going to show, you know, how much they care about each other and how much they want them to be a part of the team, because people love that Mystery Gang when they're all together. So I think by having that longing for it by the end, you're able to have a space where you can keep them separate and have them doing different things and then meet up in the end, and then everybody's kind of happy. But we wanted to kind of keep going back to them because they were pursuing their friends, trying to find out what happened to them. And you could switch it. There were thoughts of switching that, which I thought was kind of fun, you know, because it's kind of more of like a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's like these two guys that are like kind of clueless have to now find their friends in this version. Like, instead of the other way around where like the brains are trying to find Scooby and Shaggy, these two guys are trying to find the brains. And so that was thought about. We had a couple of different ways to do it, but there was always a pursuit of the other, so that you could kind of intercut and keep them both alive throughout the movie. So by the time you did come to the end, you know, you had them all together again. So, yeah, it was definitely thought of. I think it was another one of those things. Like, we have Blue Falcon, we have Dynamite, we have Dee Dee Skies, we have Shaggy, Scooby, we have Caveman, and now we got the other 3 Mystery Gang members. Like, we're already at like 10 or 11 people in 2 seconds.
And the villains.
Yeah, and then you got Dazzly and Muttley and all the Rotten. So it's like, it's a lot. So I think that was, what do we do? I think it was more like, do we take out the Mystery Gang and then bring them back? Like, it was really more of like, you know, wow, we have a lot of characters. How are we going to deal with this? As opposed to like, we got to get rid of the Mystery Gang. They're boring. You know, that kind of thing. I think everybody wanted them in there. It's just, how do we do it so it feels like they're a part of this movie? So, but I think at the end it was like, I really liked cutting their stuff together. I thought it was fun. I think that each of the cast members did a great job with those characters. So I thought Zach was funny. I thought all of them were really great. So those sequences were really funny, and just seeing the scene with Fred and Dastardly as the female cop, like how that developed, like that stuff was funny. Like we're like, oh, we got to throw Dreamweaver in on this one, or like we had all these ideas, and it was funny to see how that kind of lingered, where Fred was still kind of obsessed with her all the way through the end of the movie. We thought that was kind of funny. So yeah, it brought a little maturity to the joke telling, I think, which was kind of fun with those guys. Amanda was great, and it was just like they all had their pieces that were kind of fun to work with. So
I saw this great thing online. It must have been a Mystery Incorporated fan. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Mystery Incorporated.
I saw a fair share, but not a ton. But yeah.
Okay, so Fred loves traps.
Definitely.
And somebody online was pointing out that the police officer that pulls them over is essentially a trap because it's Dastardly in disguise, and Fred is falling for a trap because he loves traps and he's attracted to traps. Right. And I was like, many levels.
We actually did have a scene, I think one of the board artists probably posted it too, which was Fred setting the trap for Dastardly, and he was explaining it. It was really funny, and the girls are just like so over it. It was pretty funny to watch. So it went from him setting the trap to Dastardly setting the trap for them. It was kind of a different play on it, but it was fun to do.
That's a good segue to talk briefly about the cast. I'm curious, there's a lot of really good vocal performances for this movie, and I wondered if any of those performances, because they are recorded much earlier in the production process, before the animation, did any of their performances affect the editing or cutting of the film in any way?
Not really. I mean, it's tough. Sometimes you can get some serious improv that comes in. I mean, we had that with on Ninjago with Kamal and with Zach Woods and Justin Theroux. They just like went off on this thing and made a scene like hilarious. Like they just went to town. I think Zach brought some stuff to the Fred character where he would go off on some tangents that were really funny. Then we would try to kind of piece that together with other stuff that we could get from Amanda or from Gina to make that stuff work. And Dastardly, I think he definitely brought some stuff to it also. So I think there's a couple of characters that kind of pushed it out there and tried some stuff. And that, for me, I always hope that does affect the edit. You know what I mean? Because if they're going a place that's like, for me, that I didn't think of or the writers didn't think of, and it's funny and it's working, in my opinion, it's going in. Let's try this. Let's see if we can make it work. And maybe we need to bring back one of the other characters that are, riffing with them in that moment, and we need to get the return off of their jokes that they're doing to really complete the joke. You know what I mean? So for me, it can definitely affect the edit, and hopefully in a good way, make it funny. So, or make more sense. Sometimes they get a script and they're like, why would I be saying this? This doesn't make any sense. And you sit there and you're like, good point. What do you think it should be? You know what I mean? So, and like, not that the writing isn't making sense, but sometimes you could take it and like people will all of a sudden take an idea and then run with it, and it becomes even that much more of an idea. For me, I think, there are no bad notes in the way I feel the film industry goes, or in the editing room. That's kind of one of the things my dad taught me. Like every note is for a reason, whether it's a good note or a bad note. It might take you to a place you never would have gotten to. So I like that. Somebody says some note, I never say like, that's a stupid note, I'm not doing that. I'm like, cool, let's try it, see what happens. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, we never would have done this. And so I'm open to any notes.
So you have worked quite extensively in both comedy and horror. A lot of people compare the two, saying that, comic timing and the timing of scares and whatnot, a lot of that obviously has to do with editing and this way that it's shot. I wonder if that's your attraction to it, and which of the two do you prefer, if any?
I mean, I like them both. I like sad. I like them all. Like, for me, if I'm sitting in a theater and because I love to, like, if we're previewing and stuff, I love to sit down in the theater, run the dial, and sit with people and just kind of get a feel of what they're... And when you see a person next to you, like, laughing hysterically at a joke that you guys set up and it works, it's a great feeling. If you see them jump out of their seat, scared, that's awesome. You see people crying. I mean, anytime you can get somebody to emote in a theater, it's pretty cool.
You're doing
Yeah,
your
you're
job.
doing your job, you know, and sometimes you're like, oh God, that did not work. Like that person should be laughing there, or that person should be crying there, or that person, you know, should be scared. So I think, yeah, I'll take any of them. If any of them are working, I feel like I'm doing my job. And yeah, it's a fun process. That's the best part out of it all, is like being able to sit in the theater and know that something is working correctly. You're having a ton of people laughing hysterically at something, or you know, sad or scared out of their minds. I love that stuff. That's kind of why I do it.
Is there an example? It's okay if you don't have one, but is there an example on SCOOB where in the process, something that didn't seem to be working, like a slight tweak, just made it click and you're like, oh, this is magic now?
I'll tell you, when Scooby and Shaggy met for the first time, in our first preview where we actually showed, because a lot of it was boards, and then we'd have some animation, and like we were really kind of, some of those early screenings were pretty tough on an audience to watch, you know, and they sat through it and gave, you know, great notes. But once we really had some of that final animation for Scooby and Shaggy meeting for the first time, like I was sitting next to some people, and you know, they were like, took their, like, it was really crazy. They were very emotional. I was like, whoa, that was weird. All of a sudden I get like kind of like goosebumps a little bit. And then when they get kind of bullied and knocked to the ground outside the haunted house, and Fred comes over and he says, are you okay? You know, and reaches down to pick him up. And then you see the Velma and Daphne. People were like they were like, had little gasps, and like they were like, oh my gosh, it's that. Like it was trip. I was like, whoa, like it was really cool. Like it was like, wow, this is working. People like seeing them as little kids. We weren't sure. I mean, you know, they're all cute and stuff, but that little moment, you know, and the music worked right, and it just had this nice feeling. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. That stuff's working. I feel good about them as little kids is going to work. So, you know, that was one of those things, like I didn't expect it, and when it came out, it was like, oh, okay, cool. People like that stuff, you know. What
would you say is your takeaway off of SCOOB?
You know, it was a long process, but a really interesting one. I learned a ton from all the people that I spent time with over at WAG. They were all, you know, so good to me, and, you know, I just had a great time. Yeah, I feel like, you know, it was a movie that kind of hadn't found itself, and it was nice to finally kind of grapple it and put it together and get it out there. And the camaraderie of the crew and how hard everybody worked to get that thing out was pretty unbelievable. You know, I mean, at one point we had to strip down everybody at the stage. I was only up there for a certain amount of time, and then it was like Warner Brothers, like, everybody's got to go home, and everybody was working remotely. And so the people that stayed, that were able to kind of get that stuff done, finish those notes on the stage, get the M&E done, get everything done, finish the DI, because a lot of us, you know, we had to kind of stay away for a bit. It was tough, and like I have mad respect for everybody that helped finish that movie and get it done. It was I have some of my best friends that worked on that show, and so I love those guys. They're so great, so talented. I'm happy to see everybody kind of going off to do other things or staying there and sliding off on other ones. So it was just, you know, it was like a family over there for me. So it was like a 4-year like I'm not working there right now. I kind of slid off, but I had a great time with all of them.
Cool. If there's a sequel and they call you, do you go back?
I'd go back. They're great.
A couple more questions that I ask everybody who I talk to, just for Scooby curiosity. Do you have a favorite iteration of the television show? Or I suppose the movies can also count. Mm-hmm.
I'd probably go back to Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, for me. You know, I think that's probably, you know, that taps into my childhood and stuff. So I think that's probably the one. I mean, I liked what the live action ones were doing, and it was, you know, that stuff is pretty, in a way, kind of groundbreaking, trying to pull in this CG dog into this world. You know what I mean? It's not easy to do, so I have mad respect for those. But yeah, my love is when I was a little kid watching the original stuff and getting into it, all that stuff. That's kind of my favorite. I'm not sure which one. I'm trying to think which one is my favorite. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many characters. It's crazy. Sorry.
Do you have a favorite member of the gang?
I mean, Scooby's an easy one to go to for me. And I always liked Velma. I'll be honest with you. I was a big Velma fan for some reason. I just liked her brains and like how she did things was always kind of fun. But for me, the comedy is always Scooby and Shaggy getting in trouble and doing stuff. So I think it's probably those two as a pair, to be honest. Because they were the comedy for me.
Yeah, they're kind of inseparable in more ways than one.
They really are.
So this franchise is it's invincible. It's been going on for 50 years. So many iterations, so many live action, animated. Like as we discussed before, this is something that people are entrenched with, these characters. Having worked behind the scenes with other people involved in the franchise, do you have any insight as to why these characters, why this IP has survived for as long as it has?
I think it's because it's just a couple of kids. It reminds me of some of my friends hanging out with, and then you also lace in like this mystery, and you want to know what happened and how are these kids going to figure it out. You want to see who the villain is. You're always trying to say like, oh, it's this guy, oh, it's that guy. You're always trying to put it together, for me at least. And so I think that's probably what resonates with a lot of people, because it does feel like it could be you and just your friends figuring some stuff out. Not every friend group, but I know my friend group had a Scooby and Shaggy in it. These two that were just like Dumb and Dumber, but like hilarious. And so I think you can tap into that from your friend groups and stuff like that. And like they kind of, each of those characters can be any of your friends. And so it just kind of taps into who you are as a little kid growing up and stuff. And then in teen years, things that they're going through, you're going through. But through all of that, these guys are also trying to solve a mystery, which is kind of fun and exciting. So I think that's why it just captivates people and they just love it. Different villains and that stuff, which is fun.
Okay, great. That's all I have for questions. If anybody wants to follow you online, check out kind of what you're doing, keep tabs on you, where could they find you?
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't really have like a website or anything. I just edit. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. And the rest is just whatever movies I'm working on. You can usually see on IMDb, I guess.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Ryan, for sharing these insights. This is it's been really interesting talking to the people working on SCOOB, and I mean, it was such a long, protracted production. There's stories. There's all kinds of stuff that was going on that we're not seeing in 93 minutes on the screen. So this has been a really good deep dive into the process. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I had a great time. Go see SCOOB. We all work hard on it.
Comes out on DVD and Blu-ray, I think July 21st.
Sweet. Nice.
And currently on HBO Max.
I think they did a lot of extras in it, too. So any of those scenes that you're talking about, I recall going through a list of those scenes that got left on the floor. I think there's going to be a lot of little exciting pieces in there that people might like, And you'll get to see,
I hope so.
I think some of them are boarded out, too. So you get to see some of these board artists and their work, because they do an amazing job. These people are really talented, and I don't know what the animation world would do without them. They're incredible. And it's not just like, hey, here's a scene, give it back to us exactly as we asked. You let them open up their imagination, and they bring you the scene that they think it should be. At least the good ones really do, and they push it. And I love that process. You don't want to ever like have a person with artistic ability like that sitting with their hands under their feet because they're told to, and just do this script. Like, yeah. Bring me what you got. I want to see your comedy. I want to see your artistic ability, and put it all together. And when people do that, it's so much fun, so collaborative, and there's no ownership of jokes. There's no ownership of anything. It's just a lot of fun. That's the way it should be.
They're kind of like little directors in their own right, because they're given sequences.
Definitely, yeah.
And they're usually sequences that play to their strengths, because the people in charge, they're hired for a reason, and they're just kind of like, show me what you got.
Exactly. And watching them pitch it is the best. Some people, when they pitch, like how they step through their drawings is just hilarious. And they're doing the voices and stuff. It's like they're having so much fun. And when you see the people that really love what they do, it's you see it in the boards. It's super fun. So,
yeah. I know there's no commentary on the Blu-ray, which breaks my heart because I'm a commentary fan.
Oh, right.
You don't see a lot of those these days.
And Tony would be so good with that, too, because Tony is just like, he's got a story for everything. Everything that happened on that show, he's a great storyteller. He has a lot of fun with that stuff. I'm surprised.
All right, so thanks again, and take care, and best of luck in your future projects.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was great talking with you. I appreciate it.
And there you have it. That concludes my conversation with one of the editors of the 2020 CG animated feature film, SCOOB. I hope you enjoyed listening to Ryan's stories as much as I did. And as I hinted in the intro, I hope you're enjoying the new format. For the time being, as I kind of talked about in the previous episode, and as I wanted to talk a little bit more in this episode, I've been releasing things as full chunks. I used to chop my interviews into roughly like 30 to 40 minute episodes. I felt like that was kind of the average commute time, bus ride. When I listen to podcasts, I'm not a big fan of like the 2-hour podcast. I generally try to avoid those, especially making those. And when I do end up listening to those, they're usually podcasts that I do in chunks. And that was ultimately where the kind of decision came down. If I'm listening to a 2-hour podcast in chunks, or I'm having a podcast being released to me in parts, I kind of felt like having the ability to decide when you listen to those chunks, having that agency was a little more important than any other convenience that comes with releasing them the way I was previously. I am, however, really curious what you guys think. If you're liking getting the interviews this way, in these larger, fuller chunks, I will still avoid a 2-hour interview all in one kind of episode. That is still something I'm going to chop up into at least 2 parts. And I do have an interview coming up with a couple of gentlemen who we had so much fun chatting, and the conversation digressed, and we covered a lot of stuff. And even though we went into it thinking we were going to do like a half an hour, we ended up doing, it was almost 2.5 hours of conversation. So when I do edit that down, that's an example of how I kind of want to move forward with this. So really, if you have any thoughts on the subject, feel free to reach out either on the YouTube channel in the comments section, on the Facebook page in the comment section, on the Instagram, on Twitter, pretty much all of the social media. You can find me there at Scooby-Doo Cast, or a podcast named Scooby-Doo. And while you're there, feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to all the various platforms. And if you're enjoying this episode or any of the other episodes, sharing them on your social media, spreading the word that way is it's a powerful tool. And I encourage you to do it if you want to support the show. Also, if you do get the show off of something like iTunes, while you're there rating and reviewing the show, it really does help with the algorithms and getting the show kind of into the eyes and ears of people who might be interested in checking this out. And as always, there is the blog, scoobydoocast.wordpress.com, where I haven't really been posting a ton, but I have been posting the Apocalypse variations, as I've mentioned on previous podcasts, where I am interviewing, in short interviews, artists who have worked on Scooby Apocalypse, doing variant covers primarily, and they talk about their process and share some of their process work that is posted there for you to see. I do have a new one in the wings. The questions have been sent off. I'm just waiting for them to come back. So I'm looking forward to that and getting another one of those up. I'm really enjoying doing those. I really like having the ability to not just have like the audio interviews, but also the text interviews. I mean, you can't really do a full show interview on somebody who literally just did like a cover of a comic book. So it's a really nice way to still include that perspective and that history in a really palatable, manageable sort of way where I think everybody involved is happy with it. So check that out. And that's pretty much all I have for this time around. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show, for downloading and listening, and letting me take up some space in your day. It's always a cool thing to see that people are listening and responding. I mean, I'd be doing this for myself, but it's rewarding to know that there's all of you out there that are along for the ride. So appreciate it. Hope everybody is staying safe, staying well. There's a lot more conversations to come. I'm really excited to get these things out there so you guys can hear them. So stay tuned, and we will catch you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Everybody cheer! This is how
mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.